We are live again, and we're going to do a few videos here in a row. We got 4 different videos here to watch. I think they're actually from all 4 different people. Am I right about that? First entry, Alyssa, Becca, and Shilene. Yeah, we got 4 different people today. So we're going to watch all of these. I'm going to give my thoughts on them as we go along. And we'll see what we have to say, huh? All right.
So I've come up with this really cool idea for a story about this magical school for witches and wizards. And it's going to have dragons in it and trolls and goblins, and it's going to have magic broomsticks and magic wands, and it's going to be absolutely epic.
Yes.
And I've got my main character as well. He's called Bob.
Bob,
And
yes, that's a good one.
well, Bob's pretty boring, to be honest. He doesn't really want anything. He doesn't need anything. He's pretty happy. He hasn't really got any past traumas or hurts or regrets. There's nothing that he really wants to change about his life.
Regret, right?
He doesn't really have any emotional stake in the plot, but that's okay, you know.
That's okay.
He's Bob. It doesn't really matter. Loads of crazy stuff happens in the plot to do with trolls and dragons and stuff, and it all kind of happens around Bob. He doesn't really try and do anything. He's not really affected in any way by the plot, but it doesn't matter, does it? Because the concept is so cool. I've got magic, I've got witches and wizards, I've got all this stuff. Like, surely that concept and the location and the creatures and the magic are enough to make this a brilliant best-selling story, even though it's Bob and not an actual interesting character. Let's turn that on its head. There was a film and a book called Room. The location is literally just a room. There's no special concept to it other than there's 2 people locked in a room, a little boy and his mum, and the location's very simple, the concept is very simple, but that was an absolute, like Harry Potter, an absolute best-selling success and was shortlisted for a Man Booker Prize. Now, why did Harry Potter do so well, and why did Room do so well? In the case of Harry Potter, it's definitely a large part of it is the concept. It's an absolutely amazing concept, but we know it's not just the concept because our Bob story would have been absolutely poor, and lots of people write stories like that every single day. But Harry is an actual compelling character. He's got past traumas and hurts and pains and wants and things that he wishes were true, and he's living a quite tough life throughout the series. So it's not just the concept, and we know it's not just the concept because of Room. Why?
I would interrupt here and say that with Harry Potter, it's a great example actually, because I feel like a lot of our writing nowadays, like young adult writing, I think a lot of it does come from people who read Harry Potter as a kid. They basically want to write their own version of Harry Potter in a way, right? And because they're adults, they want to maybe write a more adult version kind of thing, whatnot. And that's all fine. That's all fine. But I think that a lot of people took what Harry Potter had, which honestly, like Harry Potter, if you look at him, and this does kind of change on the books, Harry is kind of like Bob, where things are happening around him, and that's definitely okay or at least more okay in the first book, because he's learning. He's not really sure what's going on. He's so new to this world that he's just kind of standing there in awe of everything that's going on, and we as the reader get to be also in awe of everything that's going on around him as well. But there are a few key moments where Harry, even in the first book, but in others, does take action upon himself to do things. And obviously, you know, in the last book, it's very clear that he's really taking control and he's very much taking action. I mean, they get lost for a while, but, you know, technically he's like, we are trying to find the Horcruxes. We are trying to figure this mystery out. We're trying to find out where the Horcruxes are, and we want to destroy them all. And so he is driven by his own desires. But there is, for a large part, he's not really doing things, to be honest. It teeters back and forth, basically. But the bad thing is that I think that a lot of people who read Harry Potter, who write nowadays, they take what was one of his strongest suits, which was that he did have these past traumas, right? And that he was abused as a kid. And so he had past and current traumas, really. He had past and current going on. But he had this abusive childhood. And so a lot of these writers that I've seen cropping up, and again, especially in YA, they have a good sympathy character, but the character doesn't really do a whole lot. They just kind of like let things happen around them. And I think that is definitely a problem that even Harry Potter did suffer from at times. So Harry might not be the best example. Now, I will also say, though, that Harry had Hermione with him, and Hermione was very active quite a bit. And that's because she knew a lot. She was a very capable character, right? She was, because of her intelligence, she was very enabled to do things that enabled the plot to move forward. Because otherwise, without Hermione, half the time, they wouldn't have been able to move forward in the mysteries that they were involved in, right? So I guess that is kind of a way to offload that a little bit from like your main character. If your main character is not super active, having a secondary character be more active and getting that main character to come along. There is kind of a question of like, well, why isn't that secondary character just the main character then? And, Harry Potter has its reasons, so maybe your book could too. But just I would caution people who are looking at Harry Potter as like a very great character. Harry Potter the novel, or Harry Potter the series, had a lot of great characters, yes. But I don't know if Harry Potter is really the protagonist that we should really look to for like a gold standard, I guess is the point I'm trying to get there.
Did Room do so well? Well, it can't be the location, and the concept is very simple, and simple doesn't always mean bad, but I think a big part of the reason Room was so successful is the characters, their struggles, their wants, their wishes, their hopes, their fears, the chemistry between the characters. Every single thing about those characters enhances the story, and that's why you can have literally the most simple location in the world, a room, and still have a best-selling novel. Now, I'm not saying you have to love or hate Harry Potter, and I'm not saying you have to love or hate Room, but what I am saying is those stories wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful if not for the characters. There have certainly been really successful things that have very bland characters, but the question that I think we all have to ask ourselves is, do we want to write a story that's got boring characters or a story that's got interesting characters? And I think everybody has the same answer. We all want to surely write an interesting character as opposed to a bland character. And the amazing thing is you can have both if you want. You can have an interesting, compelling character, and you can have that character in a crazy concept, a big epic concept with dragons and magic and cool locations, or whatever kind of style of story you're writing. You can have both. You can have the big concepts and the interesting characters. But you can't just have the concepts and locations and rely on that. It's not going to work. If you have a really cool concept and great locations and stuff, what you've essentially written is an encyclopedia if the character is no good and if the story is no good and the story comes from the character. I see the character as kind of the food, and
I mentioned this before in one of my other videos. I'm not sure which one it was, but I've mentioned before that even if your story is, main character defeats, big bad dragon, that might be like the climactic, like the physical climax, but that's probably not really going to be like the real meat of your story. That's going to be, a lot of the flash that's going on, a lot of the wow factor. Unless that dragon has more personality than normal. A lot of times dragons are just monsters, right? But if you make it more like the sentient dragon that has, plots and schemes or whatever, that they are really their own character, then sure, it could be more detailed. But that right there ties into why it would be better, is because of the fact that if that dragon is not just a big physical threat, but it's also dealing with the emotional pulls that the main character has, right? Whatever your story is on the outside, whatever your character is dealing with on the outside, it has to be also touching on their one of their core values. I've mentioned core values numerous times, and their core value has to be challenged, right? One of their core values needs to be challenged during the arc of the book, and that's usually going to involve, personal relationships, right? Now that could be with the villain, yeah, but it's usually actually going to be with their friends, their loved ones, their family members, allies who might betray them, that kind of stuff too, and also the conflict with the self, right? That character realizing that they have to overcome this dilemma inside of themselves. That's where a lot of like the most compelling drama really comes from in stories, is when we're watching a character struggle with themselves. Struggling with other people emotionally is also very engaging, and then struggling with people outside of emotions, physically or whatever, that's engaging, but it's never going to be as engaging as those more personal levels.
All the locations and concepts and stuff is like the garnish and the sauce and on all the stuff that helps make it delicious, and it is important, but you don't just want to eat garnish and sauce unless you're an absolute weirdo. You might be, and you might also be the sort of person who loves big concepts where absolutely nothing happens in the story and the characters are bland. Hopefully you're not that sort of person and you want to write really interesting characters. So the question becomes, how do we write interesting characters? And it's stuff I talk about a lot on this channel, so I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but I just can't stress it enough. Your character needs something that they really desperately want in their life, something that they want to change, something that they want to gain, something that's missing. They really, really want it. Without that, it's just a person wandering through your story. They need to want something. And if that's the case and they need to want something, then we as the writers need to make it really, really hard for them to get it. Really push them through hell to get this thing that they want. If they just get it, that's pretty boring as well. What's the point in that? So, okay, there's a person, they really want something, and then on page 2 they get it, and that's the end. No, we want to really make it difficult. And even better if the reason they can't get what they want is an external thing and an internal thing. So some kind of external thing, an antagonist, someone who's really getting in the way of them getting what they want, but also maybe something internal, something they need to change, something they need to fix and work on and develop as a person. That's going to help them maybe overcome the external thing and then get what they want. I used to go on quite a lot of writing forums where people would ask questions and stuff, and the questions were always things like, there's magic in my story and they can use flames with their hands. Do you think the flames should be the colour of normal flames, or should they be like magical colours like purple and blue? And that's an okay question.
Oh my god, I know exactly what he's talking about. This is something I see quite often. Oh god, it honestly makes me like not want to engage in like those communities, because I just feel like those questions are such nonsense. It's like dude, why are you even why are you asking this? You know what I mean? Like, is the question really more like, I want to make my flames purple, but I'm worried that that's not going to come across well or something? Like, I don't understand what these questions are coming from, because they're so like, they just don't feel like they are needed. Right? They don't feel like they deserve the time it took you to ask it. Does that make sense? Like if I'm going to take the time to actually type out a question, probably retype it a couple times to make sure that I'm like explaining myself as best I can, because meaning and doesn't get conveyed right through text and whatnot. So. Am I really getting my question across? So I'm going to write that a number of times, and then I'm going to put the question out there, and then I'm going to wait for a response and hope that I get multiple responses. And it's just like, was the question of like, you know, like he said, like, should I make my fire blue or purple rather than red? Was that question like really worth your time? Is it really worth my time to answer that question? Like, why do you think I should really even answer this question? Like, if you need help, that's understandable, right? I have a dilemma. I need a character to kill someone else, but I'm worried that having them kill someone is going to make them too irredeemable for the audience. And I need the audience to like this person at the end, but killing the person is going to be, I think, too much. Like, that might be a question that I feel would, you know, like you might go seek help for it, right? I need my character to do a bad thing. I have an opening where they can kill somebody, but I feel like killing is going to be too much and like that kind of thing, right? But I do see these questions pop up where it's just like, that is just a complete fluff. That's just complete fluff what you're asking there. It doesn't really matter if the flames are purple or blue or green or white. It doesn't matter. Like, that's completely irrelevant. So yeah, it's really weird when I read those questions.
It's a question that's worth asking yourself if you're writing that kind of story. But I promise you the answer doesn't really matter, and certainly doesn't matter compared to who is my character, what do they want, what's getting in their way of getting what they want, why can't they get it, what are their hopes and fears, what are their weaknesses, what are things that they wish they could change about themselves, about the world. The real deep personal questions about who this character is. You could put that character into any location and it will be an interesting story because it's honest. We know who this character is, we know what they want, we know what they're trying to do, and we want to see them get it because we love them. Even if it's a really deceptive character, an evil character, if they're interesting and honest about how they feel to the reader and they really want something, we will still stay to the end. Normally it's not an evil character.
Normally it's not, but there have been TV shows and books that have done a really good job of making you like the villain. I'm looking at one of my Marvel posters over there, and so just as an easy example, everyone loved Thanos in the first movie, because that movie was more about Thanos than the second one, right? So we didn't really get Thanos's POV in the second movie that he was in, but in the first one, Infinity War, we were really getting Thanos's point of view. The movie was about Thanos and kind of then how the Avengers were responding to him, but it was really more of Thanos's journey. And even though Thanos was the bad guy, we were still, you know, following him. We were enthralled with what he was doing, and we were interested in his character choices, all that kind of stuff. And there's plenty of other books and movies out there that have done this, where you root for the bad guy because they're interesting, right? So that's very true. That's very true on that. One thing that I would add, which I kind of already touched on, as far as, you know, the having your character's core values, is I hear a lot of times people are like, you know, what do they want? What do they wish they could change about themselves? Like, there's basically a laundry list of these questions that I feel aren't exactly necessary to have to go through, because I feel like if you understand what just a few of their core values are, I usually say like 4 is probably a good number. You could go to 5. 3 is a little shallow, to be honest, for like your main character. But you could probably still get away with it. But knowing like 4 of their core values will probably answer a lot of those questions for you. You know, if these are their core values, and we know the world that they're in, what's something they wish they could change about themselves? Oh, well, it would be this because of that core value. What's something that they would change about the world if they could? Well, it would be this because of that core value, right? Like, you know the answer to those questions because you just drilled down a little deeper. So to anyone who is going through like a character sheet and they're asking those kind of questions of like what's something that they would what's their favorite music, or like what is their their biggest fear, all that kind of stuff. All those different things, if you just drill down as far as you can into a person and you get to those core values, those things that they will fight for, those things that they will die on that hill for, right? If you get to those and you answer those, and answering is really just making them up, right? You go, okay, what do I want this person's core values to be? You're the author, right? It's not like you have to let them decide, right? You're making this character up. You're making their core values up, right? It's up to you. So when you give them their core values, when you've decide what those are, when you figure out what those are, whatever your process might be, when you're making that character, if you just drill down all the way to their core values, then all those other answers will come out pretty easily.
Who's the main character? It's someone that we actually can relate to in some way, and just in general, just care about what happens. We want to know if they're going to get this thing, and we want to see how they're going to get it and how they're going to overcome it. You can think about what are the colours of the flames in my character's hands. It's all stuff that's going to really help flesh out your story. But you've got to have the story. You've got to have this nugget.
Yeah, knowing what the color of the flames is very much either just like you mentioned before, kind of like dressing. It's very much like a garnish on a dish, unless you want to be tied more into like the world building, right? Like, oh, well, if their flame is white, that means this, versus if their flame is orange, that actually means this instead. Or like, you know, if they have to use like a different regent to get the flames to come up to the first place, or for their magic to work, whatever, right? You might make it that, where it's like, okay, if they're using a red flame, then you know this about the character now. That automatically tells the reader that this person is good, or they're evil, or they just ate, or they're very hungry, or, you know, whatever it is that you want to convey with that information. You could have the color of the flame be a little bit more than just garnish, by having it relay some sort of information to the reader that, oh, if it's blue, then this must be true, then, that kind of thing.
Food on the plate that's the real meat of the story of what is this character, what do they want. You could tell other really interesting stories set in the Harry Potter universe based around other characters if they follow these rules of like us knowing what they want. What wouldn't work is a story set in the Harry Potter universe about a character like Bob who just doesn't want anything. There's no reason for them to be there. They're just drifting through. The concepts are all still amazing. We've got all the stuff that we love. We've got Quidditch, and we've got, you know, Dumbledore. Well, not Dumbledore,
Ron?
but we've got all the stuff we love.
About Ron?
It just wouldn't matter because this character is just not someone we care about. We don't really care about anything that happens to him.
I feel like my memory of Ron is probably tainted by the movies, because I definitely have watched the movies more than I read the books. But, oh gosh, I do kind of wonder if Ron is a bit more of a potato on screen than he was in the books.
See all the time is that it seems like new and young writers are kind of treating their book like it's a video game. They're thinking about, right, what does this place look like? What are the characters? What are the races? What are the religions? What are the magic systems? What are the... You know, I always talk about fantasy and I talk about magic and dragons and stuff, but no matter what it is, spaceships or any kind of story, they're thinking about the aesthetics of it, what it feels like, and this is important stuff. I'm not knocking it at all. It's really important to know how your story feels. Who's it going to appeal to? You know, I want a hint of
that. Everything he just went over, though, is not the story. That is the setting. That is, you know, building your cultures. That's all world building, and that's, again, world building is necessary. Because, you know, when I think about it, and it was funny, I was actually writing a script for another video that talks about how when I was world building for a video game, actually. And then I decided, you know what, I've got a lot of notes here. And a lot of times video games don't really catch on without having a good story, right? The games that last, I mean, nowadays anyways, obviously like a game like Mario can survive, you know, the World War III nuclear holocaust. I mean, it'll survive anything, right? But newer games, they need to have a story and characters that drag people in and keep them there, make them come back again over and over. Gameplay will keep people coming as well to a certain degree, but not like it used to. Gameplay is not the king of getting people to return. It is really more story and character driven nowadays. Not even graphics, right? I mean, you can see a lot of games that have very poor graphics that do very well. And again, it's because the characters and the story are pulling people in. So everything he just mentioned there are things that I definitely considered because I wanted the game to have these things in it. I wanted my books to convey these things, so that way, because like whenever you sell your book rights to either like a movie or to a game developer or a producer or whatnot, basically, yeah, sure, you might be able to be like in contact to a certain degree. Like you're going to be probably used as an asset to ask questions a little bit here and there, that sure. But for the most part, you're kind of out of the loop. It's not really in your control anymore. So I thought of, how do I convey this information through my books to a developer, to someone who's going to either, create this game for me. Well, not really for me, but they're going to create it themselves for money. But they're going to create this game on my behalf because I won't be there. I'm not going to be the one in the room telling them how to make a game, since I have no knowledge. I have no developer experience. Or someone who's making a movie / TV show, that kind of thing, right? How do I convey these things? And it is important to know that stuff. It helps ground your book, makes it to where you can have a more realistic reality that the reader can feel grounded in. Okay, this is what's true and real in this world, so that's fine. And that way, when you get to those more extreme fantastical moments, they are more ready for those. It's not as much of a suspension of disbelief as it would have been had you just launched them straight into it, kind of thing. But it's not the story, right? It's like those things are not talking about the story. You have to have characters, and you have to have those characters go through struggles. You have to have those characters deal with their, like you said before, like their desires and their wants. Have those internal struggles and external struggles. And knowing your world building is really important, but it's not going to that will not be a book for you.
Like the Zelda games in there, and I want a hint of Breaking Bad in there, and all this stuff, and you're meshing it all together, and you can come up with this thing that feels really good, and maybe it'd have the absolute most beautiful book cover in the world, and even the blurb would sound pretty cool, but nothing happens. There's not a character that I care about. It's just a template. It's just a person who's wandering through this world that I've created. It doesn't have to start with the character. I was going to say it all has to start with the character. You don't have to start with the character. You can come up with these amazing worlds first, but it does all centre around the character. Nobody cares about this amazing world that you've built unless there's someone living in it that we love. So I want to urge you to really think about who your character is, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but what do they want? What do they need? What are their hopes, their fears, their dreams, their weaknesses, their flaws within themselves? What are they trying to get? What's stopping them from getting what they want? Who is living around them, some of whom make their jobs harder and make their life harder? Who makes their life easier? Who really helps them? Who do they learn from? Who do they admire? Who do they sometimes look down on? These are the things we care about as a reader, and everything else is the delicious sauce and garnish and seasoning that's going to make the rest of it taste really good. Wow, I've just got in from work. I'm really hungry. I'm sorry that I keep talking about food. But I hope you found that useful. It's one of the most important things that I feel like I could say to someone who's trying to get better at writing. My rule number one is always to be interesting, and I think this is how we do it. It's all about the characters. Don't just take my word for it. If you buy books about writing, if you watch videos about writing and even screenwriting and things like that, it's got to all come from the character. That's why we read. We want to know about these people. So yeah, thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.
Well, thank you. And I'm gonna sound like a broken record here. Just exactly like he said, it's gonna be, you have to ask yourself those questions. I again say to drill down a level deeper, know what their core values are. What are those things that they are going to really fight for? And again, they can change. It's not that their core value has to be something that they never change, but it is something that either does change or they that core value basically solidifies more. So basically, if it ever got challenged again in another book, let's say, it would be harder for them to change, because now they kind of reinforced it. It's they tested it just as they would have if they changed it in the outcome, but in this case here, they resolved that that core value is correct and that they want that core value, so they keep it. But if you know those core values, then it's one of those things where it just makes those other questions a lot easier to know and to understand. All right, so that was a good one. Let's go ahead and do the next.